right, can you guys hear me?
There we go. Go ahead and hit a clapping emoji if you can hear. All
Can you
right,
guys hear me?
perfect.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started. So my presentation today is I've got 419 problems and BEC isn't just one. So for me, my name is Ronnie Tokazowski, and I'm a senior threat researcher with Agari. And one of the things that we focus on is we focus on Nigerian fraud. And specifically, but before I started working on Nigerian fraud, I did a lot of work in the APT space as well. So I did a lot of tracking of Chinese APT malware. Also did a lot of work with crimeware as well. And for me, you guys may know me on the Twitter sphere under the handle of iHeartMalware, just because that's kind of where I've been rambling and tweeting over the last couple of days and everything, and just a couple of years. But one of the fun things that we do with a lot of the actors when it comes to the people who are doing business email compromise, we respond back to them. And the fun thing is that you're able to gain a lot of information into how that type of scheme works when you start looking at the different things and just kind of responding back to them. So what I'm going to go ahead and be covering, I'm going to be covering the state of business email compromise. I'll kind of talk to you about the 419 other BEC problems. And you'll notice that the constant play on the 419 wording here, because again, it's something where in the industry, we track business email compromise as one thing, but it's actually includes several other types of crime. I'm also going to walk through how it's more than just money that's being lost. There's a lot more damage that's going on. And also we'll kind of take a step back and ask the question, what's fueling this BEC economy? And then it's something where I'll also work through other things as well. And seriously, we need to start fixing this because there's a lot of damages that's happening. So the other thing too with a lot of conferences, I normally try to glaze over hard topics. However, with a lot of what I've seen in the BEC space over the last couple of years, it's something where we need to start addressing it. We need to start doing more. And it's something where when as security researchers, we typically think of it just being like a digital problem, just being a computer problem. But just with the amount of death, the amount of suicide, with the amount of anxiety and depression that I've seen as a result of business email compromise and 419 schemes, it's something where we need to start looking heavier at it. And it's a lot more difficult, and there's a lot more moving pieces to it, other than just, again, the simple emails. I'll kind of be walking you through that. So I'm going to take those filters off, and I'm going to be as open and honest with you guys as I can on this type of fraud, because it's something where it really has to go away. So problem number one of business email compromise, it is an absolute dumpster fire. And it's something where everything is on fire with it. And you may be looking at somewhat skeptical and be like, okay, yes, so you're saying it's a big problem. Why does that matter? Well, we can mathematically prove that it's a problem up here. So these are the most recent statistics that came out of IC3. They're a reporting agency of the FBI. And a lot of the fraud a lot of cybercrime gets reported to them. And what they do is every year they compile the metrics and release the numbers. So again, for like the 5th year in a row, business email compromise is one of the top threats and causing the most damage. So from the 2019 report, we were able to see that BEC was responsible for about $1.7 billion losses, and that's for the entire calendar year. When we try and take a step back and look at the other types of frauds, is this something where is it really that big of a deal? So you may see this big blue piece of a pie, like up here on the slide. So you don't have to be a mathematician to say that big blue blob is probably more important than smaller blobs over on the left, or maybe not more important, but that there's a lot that number over on the right is bigger than the smaller numbers. Would everybody agree with that? So when you go and look at the actual losses as reported to the FBI, BEC for all of 2019 was this big piece of pie here. It was over 40% of all the crime that was reported to all of cybercrime losses reported to the FBI. When you start fanning out to the other pieces there at the bottom part, you'll also see that other things such as romance scams, check fraud, those are different types of crime that happen as well as for BEC, but it's something where it's a lot more difficult to actually track where those things are coming from. And it's something where once you start looking at other things, such as corporate data breaches, when you start looking at ransomware, those percentages start to get really small. So like corporate data breaches is kind of up here towards the top at like 2.3% of the financial losses that's reported to IC3. So if that's 2.3%, and 40% on the right is the BEC losses. You have to kind of stop and take a think. Okay, where do we need to start focusing our efforts? There we go. So the other thing too that came out of IC3 is they also were talking about the total cost of business email compromise that's been over the last couple of years. So they pushed out a report that talked about $26 billion being lost. And it's something where once you start reading through, once you start tracking it, it's not necessarily that it was money lost. That $26 billion right there, that is money that was money that went out and wasn't recovered, or that was money that went out and was recovered. So the exact wording that they usually use is they use exposed dollars. So that's $26 billion that has been sent out, that went out, that has a victim tied to it, that somebody actually lost money for, and either they were able to recover those funds or they were not able to recover those funds. So I've been saying BEC a lot, but let's go ahead and actually take a look at what that is. So as security researchers, most of us have actually seen a lot of this type of fraud before. It's something very simple. Hey, can you do me a wire transfer for you? I need you to take care of a purchase order. Can you give me some gift cards? These are all the beginning things of what a business email compromised email would look like. And a lot of times they may pretend to be someone in authority in order to target your employees. And that's how this scam kind of starts off. And looking at it, it's like, yeah, that's simple. It's just an email. What more can be behind this whole ecosystem? Why are you calling it a dumpster fire? Why are you pointing to big scary numbers? You're overly complicating this, and you're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. But that molehill is already there. So when we go and look at 419 scams, this is kind of where we have to start drawing those lines between what's a 419 scam and what's BEC. So a lot of people may have seen this before. This was the Power Book. And what the Power Book was several years ago, someone had received a check from somebody who they thought was in Nigeria. And what they did was they were trying to buy a laptop from them. So when the scammer was trying to purchase a laptop, had him send the laptop over. And what the story of this and how this unfolded was he knew it was the guy knew it was a scam, so he made this fake laptop and sent it back to the guy because he knew that there was no money that was traced. He put it and made it super expensive when it went through customs in order to stick the guy with this. So when you think of those reshipping scams like that, you think that has nowhere near related to BEC. But the problem is that there's actually a lot more overlaps with that. So whenever you see a business email compromise email and they use a bank account in that email, more times than not, that actually ties back to a romance scam. And we've seen other times where other things that the same actors are doing. They're also doing wire fraud. They're doing lottery scams. There's a malware that's been tied back to BEC too. Account takeovers, those silly Microsoft credential phishes that we see all the time. Those are things that are performed by BEC actors as well. Again, if we kind of keep looking at and digging into the other things that the same actors have done, we've got Craigslist scams, check fraud, mystery shopper scams, drug trafficking has been involved in that, payroll diversion, W-2 schemes, fake checks that have been sent to escorts, all considered parts of BEC, believe it or not. And if we keep going, we've also seen cases where they've used tools for people who are dead. We've seen vendor email compromise where an actor will compromise an email box and go ahead and try and watch what happens in the email box in order to go ahead and wait for an invoice to come through. Once the invoice comes through, they may modify that, they may mess with it in order to try and divert the funds from one place to another. And like I said, there's 419 other crimes I'm forgetting that the same actors are doing, but it's something where all of these crimes are done by the same people. And when we go ahead and we start looking at that, and that's where we know that this stuff is related, now we have to start asking those hard questions. What are some of those other flavors? How do BEC actors get accounts? Are there other crimes? Is it something where when we look at this entire ecosystem, is there a cultural aspect to this? Is there something that we as researchers that see the emails as they come in, but is there something culturally going on that we just aren't aware of? And the scariest question of all, and this is the one that keeps me up at night, what don't we know about BEC? What are those data gaps that we're still trying to figure out exactly how they work? So let's go ahead and start answering some of these questions. So problem number 2 of BEC, let's go ahead and take a look at vendor email compromise. One of the actors that we did tracking on was a group called Silent Starlink. And what they did was they would use account takeovers in order to use man in the mailbox to watch invoices that they would go through. And for them, it was a 50-50 shot whether they would set up the email forward rule and wait for the email, or if they would go ahead and send the email from directly from that inbox to make it look like it was that user. The benefit of setting up an email forward rule is that as its responders, we constantly look for actors logging back in to into different accounts, and that repeated login is something that we're interested in. In the case where they can set up an email forward rule, they don't have to wait. They can set up the one email account, they can set that one forward rule in the inbox, and then that's it. They can log off, go back to their day, and they're slipping all the emails from your users' accounts. So that's the way that they do it. One of the things that we noticed was this specific group was responsible for compromising 39 employees at a U.S. company. They sent 5 campaigns for that time frame, and then there was also another instance where they compromised 13 email accounts in about 30 minutes for one of their campaigns. So that was where they would have sent out a phishing kit in order to try and get credentials to log in. And now you're probably looking at me going, wait, phishing kits? What? There we go. And you're probably like, phishing kits, like as in account takeovers, how is that related to business email compromise? Well, it very much is related to it. So once we started looking at Silent Starling, these were the accounts that we saw them logging into, and it was something where they had multiple accounts and access to, and victims in multiple countries, as you can see, in multiple states. So it's something where, yes, account takeovers, credential phishing is something very much done by BEC actors, and this is just part of the ecosystem where they'll take those credentials and then feed them back to siphon money from their organizations. And you're like, okay, this is an isolated event, Ronnie. You can't be saying account takeover. You can't be saying that this is anywhere related to any of this stuff. But no, I'm serious. When you look at phishing kits, when you look at credential harvesting, this is something where the actors are doing the same things. We had another set that we were looking at, Scattered Canary. And for them, when we were looking at them, we had captured 38 unique URLs for a separate campaign that they were doing. So it was something where this group was doing all of those things too. And the other things that this one individual was involved into, they were involved in Craigslist scams, check fraud, credit card fraud, gift cards, payroll diversion, vehicle advertising. They were using applications such as Depop to try and send fake checks to victims. They were doing California teacher pension fraud. They were using FEMA disaster relief funds. They were doing tax-free fraud funds. This one group was doing a lot of these things. And again, this is the same actor who was doing all of the BEC stuff. We have a really good write-up on our website that talks about Scattered Canary, so feel free to check out the PDF. But yeah, we did a deep dive into this group to kind of walk through how they did it. And the really interesting thing with Scattered Canary, which is one of the groups I'm glad we were able to dig into. Let's go ahead and dig into the name Scattered Canary. Why did we pick that name? So Scattered kind of shows how their approach and their targeting was not like your typical groups that we're all used to seeing, where you may have a malware actor who's going to go ahead and do this one type of fraud. With this group, they were touching a lot of different crimes outside of BEC. For us, they were our 10-year canary, if you will, where we were able to actually start finding that link between 419 schemes and BEC actors. And again, it's something where it's new times and it's just different crimes that they're doing. And that's why we're seeing BEC as something where it's kind of coming up. This stuff has always been there. It's just a matter of now that we're looking at it, now that our companies are being exposed. It's something where we now have this 10 and 15 years that we need to catch up on of fraud, where they've learned all these different techniques over that time. So problem number 3, when we look at another actor, let's look at actual check fraud. And when I say actual check fraud, I'm not talking about someone goes and prints a fake check. I'm talking about a real legitimate check that was printed somewhere. So when we went and when we were looking at this one group, they were asking companies to send checks as being part of their vendor payments. And what they would say is, this is part of your invoice. This is how you're going to be able to do this payment. We saw one instance where one romance victim that we identified was responsible for $100,000 of fraud with the one actor. I'm going to dig more into romance scams here in a little bit, and I'll kind of touch more on the story. But yeah, I'll be talking a good bit on romance scams and kind of how they're related to. absolutely heartbreaking stories that we've seen there. So problem number 4, like fake checks, the ones where you may actually print something out and they may say, hey, you're selling something for $1,500. I'm going to give you $2,000, send me the $500 back. This is something that a lot of actors are doing as well. They use fake checks for fake products and services. So if you're buying or selling something on Facebook Market, Depop, if you're buying or selling something on another site, that's the type of stuff that they'll target. Usually when they do that, it's for hundreds of dollars more than they're asking for. And they'll usually say, hey, can you ship this product? And once you get the check, that now leaves you being stood the one side with a check that leaves them with getting the product that you're trying to sell, and they get a little bit of everything. So that essentially makes you out of everything because you're the one who has to be stuck with the account for that. So the way that this works, this was one case where we saw it was mystery shoppers that they were targeting, and again, this was all done by a BEC actor. So your step 1 in order to do check fraud is 1, create a website and then ask for mystery shoppers. Step 2, have people fill out that information because you need a place in order to ship that check. Step 3, you can send the checks, and step 4, that's profit. That's it. And when we started looking at this, and when we actually started tracking back some of the stuff that this one group did, we identified it was 160 checks for one campaign sent to 30 different states. So a lot of the way that this crime happens, we typically see this and we think, okay, I'm going to trace this one IP, I'm going to trace this one C2, pass it to law enforcement, and that's it. But in this case, we now had 160 checks in 30 different states. You now have 30 different jurisdictions now, even if you're going to the state level, not if you're going to the county level. When you have all those checks that are under a certain amount, it makes it really, really difficult to actually try and fight this crime. So it's something where that's something we have to keep in mind, is that a lot of the way that this works, they know that there are these data gaps and they take advantage of that in order to continue making a profit. So this was another example where they were targeting escorts. And what they would do is they said, hey, I need you to go ahead and come stay with my client for a couple of days, and we'll go ahead and give you this money. The problem was when we were looking at this, you could tell that a lot of the escorts who were being targeted weren't operating in the most legal of areas. So it was something where when the scammers went out, and if somebody was victimized with this, there's a good chance that fake check would not have been reported to law enforcement. So here's another place where we have a data gap, where we know that all of these checks went out, but when it comes to the tracking and metrics, none of that information would have obviously been reported. And those data gaps such as this start to become problems because you're not able to track exactly where the actors were coming from or see every single thing that they're working on. So speaking of crimes that can't be reported that aren't reported to law enforcement, let's go ahead and talk about romance scams. It's something where romance scams are very much one of the center focal pieces of business email compromise. And it's something where it's an area of research that I've spent a lot of time on over the last couple of years. It sucks. It really, really sucks. It's not a fun crime to work, but it is what it is, and it's part of this BEC. It's part of this BEC infrastructure. So the way romance scammers or romance scams work in this term, or in the context of BEC, actors need infrastructure in order to move money around. They need infrastructure to move it from one place to another. So what they'll do is they actually use these romance victims as the people to send the money for them. And what they'll do is they'll say, hey, I need you to go ahead, and this is for my inheritance. Can you go ahead and send this money over here to this account? And they'll tell stories to the victims and make it seem like it's something where they're actually doing good. But the problem is that there's a lot of psychological damage that goes along with that because those people are constantly being lied to and aren't able to see through it. So what they'll do in the way that this works is they will actually work with the victims, and they'll build profiles in order to engage with the potential victims. And when they'll go to build trust with them, they'll start stealing money from them. And it usually starts as something small. It's a small amount that they'll start with, and they kind of work their way up and up and up. So when you have somebody who's in this scheme, they may say, hey, I'm opening a checking account for my girlfriend. And they actually do think that they're in a relationship, and that's a lot of problem right now. So in the case of exaggerated lying that we saw, where you go and you actually have a check that that your bank knows it's fraud, the bank calls the company where the check came from. That turns out to be legit. The person that you're talking to says the check is legit, and everything else checks out, but you know it's not fraud. It's something where you can't necessarily turn it down because of your gut instinct. So it's something where how do you control somebody, and that's what a lot of our actors are figured out when talking about business email compromise. So when we go back and look at this, fake romance scam, BEC, how does this kind of overlap? Again, I'm kind of going off on tangents here, but that's the thing, is that all the actors are doing the same type of thing. We've seen Craigslist scams where they're sending fake checks to people who are work from home. We've seen them targeting romance victims on farmers dating, Christian Mingle, Ashley Madison, HIV positive dating, BDSM dating websites, and tax fraud, all literally in the same inbox. So it's something, or not the HIV positive one for dating, but the couple I have listed here were all the same inbox. So it's something where a lot of the actors are doing the same stuff. They're running multiple different types of scams as opposed to just the one. And it's something where we need to realize and know that this is just how this works. So the way that they'll socially engineer their victims is they use what they call romance scripts. And what a romance script is it's a pre-canned text format that they can talk through and send back and forth to their victim. So I want to go ahead and introduce you to Larry, who's divorced with 3, 2, and 3 kids, if you can see the text. And what this does is this is an example of one of the scripts that they can send back and forth to their victim. So each set is a different thing that they could do as their first initiation in order to start talking with their victim. These are a dime a dozen. A lot of scammers use these. A lot of scammers share them back and forth. You may see things like lottery schemes that are pulled into this. You may see car wrapping schemes that are very similar to this. We've actually seen cases where the scripts that they've built will go some 20 and 30 layers deep. And they actually have debugging information as you go through, so much so that it may say, hey, if your victim gets skeptical here at this point, say this thing to go over here. Or if they say this thing over here, go over here and give them this response. So they have almost like that live debugging information, if you will, as the scam is continuously going on. So they've really commoditized and be able to understand how the social engineering works in order to go after their victims. And it's something where it's not just a US problem. And that's the biggest problem, is that a lot of the crimes also happen outside of US borders. So we just obviously don't have visibility into it. So this was a case where they were targeting a victim in Latvia. And what they were doing is they were using the script, and they used Google Translate to translate it. But translating it back, it says, hey, my name is blah, blah, blah. I've been divorced over 12 years. I don't have a baby. I had my last marriage, which died at the age of 21. So, and then they really try and play up that really sad story to build that relationship. And the thing that they really try to do is show that they're loving, that they want to build that relationship. And a lot of the victims fall head over heels because of this. So it's something where, again, love knows no boundaries on this, and they actually will target people outside of the country as well. So remember that check that I showed you earlier? How I kind of want to come back to this one. So this was a really interesting case that we found pretty recently. And what the BEC actor was able to convince the organization of, they were able to convince the organization to send a check for $16,000 to a vendor. That vendor turned out to be a romance victim. So when you actually looked at that romance victim, and we started doing some research on them, they thought they were actually in a relationship. The relationship had persisted for about 2 years at that point. And that he thought that all of the work that he was doing for that person, he thought it was for her inheritance. And a lot of the discussions back and forth with the victim was very loving. Once this inheritance goes through, everything will be good. We'll be able to live happily ever after. So once the victim received the check, he deposited it into the bank and waited about 10 days for it to cash, or waited about 10 days for it to clear. And it was a real check, so there was going to be so for the bank perspective, there was nothing that would have made it look suspicious. Everything was all good to go. It was in his name. They would deposit, and everything was good. So initially, the actor wanted them to send the cash as Bitcoin. And what they asked the victim to do was they said, hey, there's this Bitcoin ATM that's close to you. Can you go and deposit this cash into that ATM? And he was like, I can't because it's 2 hours away. I'm sick. My car isn't working. So it was something where that they were actually that initially they started trying to dabble in Bitcoin, but once there was the problems going back and forth with that, it eventually came to the point where they opted to send it in the FedEx box. So this is a picture of the actual FedEx box that contained $15,000 cash that was sent to another romance victim that we lost track of. I have no idea where this money is. So, but you guys get to see it, and you get, and this is just again, this is just kind of how these schemes work. Is once the money is, it goes through several layers, and it becomes extremely difficult to track. And this was, let me see, my phone died. Hold on. And this was a exaggerated line. And what they did was they were responsible for doing a lot of their email compromises. They ran a lot of romance victims. And yeah, it was very heartbreaking with what they did to this guy. Another victim that we saw, we started doing open source intel gathering on them. And this was, again, another multi-year campaign. And pretty much what they said was, hey, I've lost so much money on this. I don't know how I'm going to go about doing this. And the scammer's response was, Happy New Year, I got your long email. Simple conclusion is I won't be able to get you the loan here as well because I work and we're not allowed to take loans from our company. So with that being said, I guess this is it for you and us. No point in continuing this transaction. So that's kind of the mentality that the scammer had after stealing several $100,000 from the victim. When you went to go and do research on this person, this was after the fact, several months after that, she foreclosed on her home. So it was something where that scam now affected her because she didn't have the money to go and continue living in her home because of all the money that they had scammed her out of. And it's something where you're like, okay, auctioned home, last communication, how does that relate? And again, it's something where the scammers this scammer was actually engaging with the victim. And they were actually trying to run them. And yeah, it was, okay, yes, $300,000 over 3 years. And with the last communication, it was something where, yeah, that was it. And it was Happy New Year, we can't do this anymore, and you're good to go. And what ended up happening after that was, yeah, like I said, she had to foreclose on her home. And other things that this actor was doing, they were using a scrap.io, which was a lead generation tool in order to generate leads. They were registering CEO-related emails with a private email account, and they were asking for BEC gift cards. And again, here's a screenshot of one of the emails that they were sending from the same account that was used to target the victim 3 years ago. So again, it's the same actors doing the same thing. It's just we're now seeing different flavors of it. And this was one of the more heartbreaking stories that we had that I've had to look at. And in this case, the only references I had of this victim was I had her password, her name and her password. So starting off with the engagement with the actor, her password was "Forever love you, strong for you," and "We are forever in two hearts, one love." And as time went on, those passwords kind of started to get more depressing, if you will. It started becoming things like "Too tired for this," "Too much mystery." And the last transaction that we had was the scammer had actually received her IRA account. And we don't have any information that they cashed it out. But a month later, but they had everything that they needed to for that. Unfortunately, Jane had passed away a month later after that. And that was not the end of Jane's story in this case, where after the scammers had taken her, or what we think they had cashed out her IRA account and was having her and was running her for this entire time. After she passed away, they continued using her information. And what this group did was a month after she died, they started using her information to file for auto loans. And after reading her obituary, she was a stay-at-home mom. She had homeschooled her 3 kids growing up. Not sure where her husband was, but he wasn't there, so she was either widowed or divorced, but it was just her at that point. And her kids lived in other parts of the country, so it was something where she didn't really get to see them very often. But it really said that she loved spending time with the grandkids. And me personally, my wife homeschools here as well. So this one really kind of hit home for me because it was one of those things where a lot of people who are used to having kids and who are used to having people around at all times, suddenly having that taken away is not really the greatest. It's a bad feeling, and I think a lot of us can relate right now to this, as a result of COVID-19. That even something simple like not being able to go out to the grocery store or like give somebody a high five, that's something that we all miss as humans, and that's just one of the things that we need and that we crave. had another case where the victim was messaging back and forth with the scammer, and they were purchasing gift cards for that scammer. And for her, she was paranoid that people were after her. And she had a right to be paranoid in this case because the actor had actually hacked her account. She attempted to commit suicide and actually told the scammer, "Hey, my mother had me committed, and I just want you to know I tried to commit suicide," and that she said she went crazy on that, and it was her exact words. And she told the actor this, they came back and they said, "Oh, it's me. I've always been here." Sent a picture of himself, and then kind of started asking her to cash checks weeks later. So this is the type of mentality that we have to deal with on the 419 scams on the BEC side, is because this is the level of work that these actors are doing. They don't care what they're doing, and they will do anything that they can in order to get a dollar. So it's something where we need to be aware of this and we need to understand that. Problem number 6 that with BEC and 419 scams, gift card fraud. This is a very simple one. We've all seen these here in the industry. Your actor may ask you, "Hey, can you go and give me a gift card as a reward for the employees?" A lot more recent ones is, "Hey, can you go get my nephew a PlayStation gift card?" So it's something where they'll usually ask for the pictures being sent via email, and what they'll do is once they get the emails back the with the pictures, they'll then use that on different websites, such as Paxful, such as other Bitcoin exchanges, in order to convert the gift cards over to cash, or the gift cards over to Bitcoin, if you will. And that's another way. The reason that this is important is because they're actually bypassing standard banking processes when they're doing that. So it's something where it makes it much harder to actually track this and understand where the money is going. So it's something where we need to, here in the next year or so, we're going to need to start addressing this, figuring out how this works and what we can do in order to address it. Because again, a lot of actors are using this. I know that North Korean actors had actually used Bitcoin and gift cards in order to bypass sanctions. So it's something where, yeah, there's a lot of fraud that's coming up in gift cards, and that's a big ecosystem that people kind of need to start looking at sooner rather than later. The other problem 7 to whatever, is the data gaps, and I kind of touched on this earlier. But when you actually go talk to a victim of romance scam, they don't want to talk. And the reason for that is because they've been abused, they've been put in this relationship for multiple years, so their reality is now something that's completely different. They may think this one thing, like in the case of the story where the woman attempted to commit suicide. With her case, she actually had contact with the CIA. But what she didn't know was that contact was actually the scammer who had said something else. So in her mind, she actually thought everything that she was seeing and everything that she was doing was right. So to her and to a lot of the victims, it's hard for them to see like the reality of the situation if they've been scammed like this. And there's a lot of really interesting psychology here when you start looking at victimology, that our minds will actually play tricks on us and start lying to us to help us cope with extremely difficult situations like that. So there's a lot of really untouched psychology here, which is really fascinating. And again, when we come talking about data gaps, 163 checks to 30 states. How do you track that? How do you go about trying to work with law enforcement to pass that over? So it's something where it's extremely difficult to understand and see how that works. Again, with the result of the victims, they don't really like reporting crimes. They don't like talking about them. So it's something where all the crime doesn't get reported. And we've learned a lot with 419 and BEC, but there's still a lot that we don't know. And there's a lot of things that, as I started tracking this stuff years ago, I'm like, I never would have thought I was going to be looking at escorts getting fake checks, and that was going to be related to BEC. I never thought I was going to be looking at romance scams, and that was going to be related. But it is what it is, and unfortunately, that's part of it. So problem number 8 of BEC is the facts of BEC. I've had people tell me that BEC isn't important. I've had people tell me that it's something where it's something that we can't care about. But when we look at the numbers, it's a lot more difficult than that. What we know, that's a fact, for all of the data that was reported to IC3 of all pieces of cybercrime, the cybercrime of, when you take that number and you calculate that out, 40% of BEC, or 40% of all cybercrime reported to IC3 is BEC, period, for 2019. Everybody can go download the report just as much as I can. All the numbers are there. All the numbers are public. Go check my math. But I will say right straight up that 40% of all cybercrime reported to IC3 by losses was BEC. When you start including the other ones like that, such as romance scams, such as real estate fraud, such as check fraud, such as all those other things too, when you look at that, again, look at that 2019 report that just came out, everybody has the numbers. Oh, and when you include the other 419 schemes that are involved, over 70% of all that crime now ties back to Nigerian fraud. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. Again, you guys have the numbers there. Feel free to check my math. Feel free to check my statistic. I'll happily discuss it. We also know that from 2000, I think this was from 2013, but we know that $26 billion have been lost since then. For BEC last year, it was $1.7 billion. For when you actually figure out, go to the 70%, that was about, I think it was like $3.7 billion that calculates out to. But over the last couple of years, $26 billion has been lost to BEC, period. That's a fact. It's numbers that we know. There's a victim tied back to every single penny of that. Other facts that we know, there's a lot of emotional damage that goes on with it. As you guys have seen, there's death, suicide, depression tied to this stuff. There's lost homes, there's lives that have unfortunately been lost to this stuff. Because there are people who have been in these romance scams that unfortunately take their life because they feel like they can't go any further. And again, this is just the things that we know, and a lot of these things I wasn't tracking several years ago. But as we've been looking at this more and more, again, it's becoming more and more of a problem. And again, this is just what we know. What are our data gaps? That's what scares the crap out of me. Sorry, my phone keeps locking up. There we go. So now that I kind of walked through all these problems, let's go ahead and start talking about other problems too, because again, how I mentioned it, the cultural aspect of it, it's something where we need to look at the other problems as well. So contrary to popular belief, it's not just a US problem, it's also a Nigeria problem as well. So when we go and actually look at the problems that are happening in Nigeria, problem number 9, rappers in Nigeria are singing praises to the Yahoo Boys, they're singing praises to wire fraud. And a lot of them are saying, hey, this is really good. You had the case where Naira Marley did a webcast. He said the Yahoo Boys were good for the economy, and their fans were obviously outraged. Why are you saying that doing wire fraud is a good thing? That's obviously not a good thing. He created a song that was mocking law enforcement, and later he was arrested for, wait for it, wire fraud. But contrary to popular belief, not all Nigerians are scammers. And it's one of those things where a lot of them actually hate the perception that these scammers have made and what they want to show is that not all of Nigeria is scammers, and that they've given the country a really bad vibe. The other thing too is that when you actually look at the government in Nigeria, unfortunately, it's extremely corrupt. Your police is corrupt, your government is corrupt, and you got bribes that get stolen back and forth for money. And here was a case where a cop asked a taxi driver in 2015 for I think it was 20,000 naira at the time, which would have been $10 if my math is right. But the driver didn't want to give him the money because he didn't have the money to give. So what the cop did was he shot the guy and he shot his pregnant wife, who was in the backseat, in the head over $10. And these are the type of problems that people in Nigeria have to face on every single day. And there's a YouTube link if y'all want to check it out. There's another rapper in Nigeria as well who also sang that who essentially sang that wire fraud is bad, and I would strongly encourage you to check out Falls. There was another rapper named 9 Ice, which is it's the number 9 ICE, but it's pronounced Nice. And Nice created a video called Living Things, and in that video he kind of walks through wire fraud and a lot of the other things. It kind of mentions that it's actually wire, it's worth the game, wire, it's worth the money. But Falls came out and actually publicly said, no, you can't sing praises of wire fraud, this is bad. You're scamming people and you can't say that. So definitely check out the discussions between Falls and 9 Ice on that, or not pronounced Nice. The other thing too, the other problem number 11 in Nigeria, is that it's not really friendly for graduates. And when I say it's not really friendly for graduates, a lot of people will finally, once they graduate, there's not a lot of jobs for new grad. In the case of one actor that we were tracking, he spent 16 months applying for jobs. He applied for work outside the country, tried to get out of Nigeria, couldn't find a job after filling out passports and a lot of other information like that. And eventually he just became a scammer because that was his only way to make money. Um, the other problem too in Nigeria is that the salary is not a lot. So your yearly salary in Nigeria is under $3,000, and there's a lot of poverty. Again, kind of just wanted to reiterate this, just because I've had a lot of locals actually reach out to me on this. Is that the local scammer culture? A lot of people hate that. A lot of the locals on the ground absolutely hate the perception that all Nigerians are scammers, and they really don't like a lot of the way that the scammers have given them this bad rap. So it's something where when you actually look at a lot of this, when you start trying to figure out a lot of scamming stuff that's been going on, a lot of the people just want to make a good life for themselves. They want to make a good life for their family. So if you have an economy where you aren't able to do the best you can, sometimes you may be turning to crime in order to just make a dollar for your family to survive. And if you had the choice of doing honest work and not making anything, or having a good life by scamming a couple people across the sea, what would you pick? It's something where I've never been in that situation, so I honestly could not answer that, but it's something where you have to keep that in mind with this stuff. Um, so moving into wrapping this up, the problems number 13 through 419. Human trafficking has been tied back to this stuff, been kind of the similar groups doing the similar things. Romance victims have been documented as being drug mules by pulling drugs from one place to another. And what they'll do, in the case I was looking at for this, the victim thought he was bringing in chemicals in order to wash money, but he was actually bringing in methamphetamine into Australia. And he brought it in a suitcase, and as he was going through, customs picked them up and charged them. There's also scams I missed, just because again, I'm 42 minutes here into this, and there's just so many other things that this stuff overlaps with. And there's many crimes, and seriously, it's an absolute mess. And like I said, when I said this was a dumpster fire, I wasn't joking, I wasn't exaggerating. It's like when you have all of these crimes being related back and forth to another, done by the same actors, nothing is being done about it. It's very hard to actually track that. Because again, going back to that 130 check example, or 160 checks in 30 states, how do you report that? What agency do you report those 160 victims to? When your checks are under $2,000, you now have to go to your state level where they don't have the visibility into understand this stuff at the federal level. So it just becomes this big mess. Seriously, it's a mess right now. Some of the failures in fighting BEC is the stigma. That's probably been one of my biggest problems over the last couple of years, is trying to fight the stigma that Nigerian fraud is something where it's easy, it's low tech, it's unimportant. But yes, you may think that it's easy and unimportant, but at the end of the day, that's what's causing the most damage, period. Look at that big pie graph. Those are the numbers. Those are the numbers that report to the FBI, to IC3, and that's all the numbers combined. When you go look at other places, such as FinCEN, they're putting out similar numbers too. When you go and look at cyber insurance fraud, there was another report that came out that said cyber insurance fraud has bypassed the number of insurance claims compared to ransomware. So it's something where, yes, it's something where where people may have this idea that users are stupid and that they're losing money. But the problem is we can't have that mindset. And the thing is that different people have different sets of knowledge as we all go through life. And we're all here in virtual reality. And as the guy who set the stream up and whatnot, it's something where some people may not know how to set the stream up. And likewise, I may not be able to know how to run an Oculus Rift, but it's something where we're all working together here in order to make this work. And a lot of the romance victims who get pulled into this, it's something where they may not know how to rebuild an engine, and they may not be able to see a scam, but it's something where they're not security researchers. So should we really blame them for not being able to see that, not being able to think of it? And again, the biggest thing I try and push is that just because you have different knowledge in something doesn't mean that it's equal to being stupid. And yes, we may try and harp on a lot of the people who clicks those phishing links in our company, but at the end, and we may kind of huff them off and security be like, oh, they're an idiot, they should have done that. But at the end of the day, would your company hire a stupid person? Would they hire an idiot or something? Well, actually, wait, I'll keep you guys out of the liability. Don't answer that. But it's something where just because they have different knowledge, it doesn't mean that your company would hire somebody who isn't smart at doing their job. And that person's obviously they're doing a job for the company and are making money for the company, They may just not be able to see how a scam works, and that's just unfortunately how it is. Um, other problems that we've had is the psychology, and it's something where when we start looking at this, we're actually the weird ones. We need to have a little patience, and when that neighbor comes up and they got their computer compromised for the third time, sometimes people just don't understand that type of fraud. They just don't understand that. The other thing too, with a lot of the romance victims, victims that get hooked emotionally, and it's something where the way when they're actually out looking for a relationship, a lot of what's going on is they get worn down by the scammers, and the scammers just kind of badger them constantly, and that's just unfortunately how a lot of this stuff works. And how do you fight back at an enemy that specializes in psychological hacking? So I know that again, that's something that we have to keep in mind is that a lot of these victims are being hooked psychologically, so we need to be aware of that. The other thing too is just the collaboration for BEC. I mean, there's a lot of places where we can share BEC intelligence, but with how fractured it is, with how spread around it is, it's something where we need more people talking about it. We need more people digging into Craigslist scams. We need more people digging into those check frauds, because that's the roots and that's the infrastructure of a lot of what's going on right now. And with the way, and to kind of put it into perspective, it would be like having a malware file and a malware sample and not looking at the registry, not looking at any of the registry edits, and not looking at the IP infrastructure for where it's coming from. That's essentially what we're doing on the BEC side. Is like we're not tracking down the infrastructure that the actors are using. We're not looking at the soft infrastructure. We need to understand and see how a lot of that stuff works. And I also run a lot of the stuff in the industry for a lot of BEC intelligence, and a lot of the approach that I've had over the last couple of years, and there's been successes made in it, is kind of looking at how do you eat an elephant. The way that you eat an elephant is one bite at a time with a lot of friends. And BEC is big, it's messy, and that's a lot of the way that we approach this, is kind of bringing on anybody who wants to help fight this stuff to help fight this stuff. Because eventually, we don't know how big it is right now, but once you have more people looking at it, it'll eventually get smaller and smaller. So the idea and kind of the end of this, and kind of I've been working business BEC for this long, and I've had this slide in my deck for several years. And I just keep tacking off and removing the numbers and just watching it slowly climb up over the years. So stop being the $26+ billion statistic, because the 26 was the last number that we had, and we just had another 3 billion added to it. I didn't feel like changing it to 29 or 30 or whatever, so I just made it easy on myself. And we need to start thinking differently. We need to start being a hacker and kind of thinking things and thinking differently. And again, I'm really getting tired of updating this slide. We need to start doing something on this. I want to do something other than fight BEC, but again, that's where the big losses are. That's where people are actually losing their lives. And until someone can point to a death tied back to ransomware, I'm going to keep fighting this stuff till it's gone. So, and with that, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer any questions. If you want, feel free to follow me on Twitter under the handle iHeartMalware. Feel free to follow my boss as well. His handle is Crane Hassel. And also, big shout out to my family and my wife and my kids who are upstairs actually watching this. And big shout out to the wife for actually letting me do this and be able to record this for everything in VR. So if you guys could, can you give her a big clap? Give her a big clap emoji for me. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. All right. So with that, I'm ready for questions. And I now have my hands back, so I can, now that I don't have to have my phone. So.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Let me go ahead and open it up for questions here.
Okay.
Go to here. And if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand, as always. Skylar has a question for you. I'm going to go ahead with Skylar.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, you may have answered this question while I was tapped out, but how did you get into doing this?
So it actually started by mistake. And it kind of just started as like a little itty-bitty snowball. So I was over at FishMe at the time. And while I was there, I used to report to the CTO of the company, Aaron Higbee. So we had gotten one of these back in, it was June of 2015 was when we got our first email. And our financial guy came in. He's like, "What's this email? This wasn't Aaron or this wasn't Rohit who sent this." He's like, "What's going on?" So we went and we started looking at it, and Aaron was like, "Hey, why don't you respond back to that email?" So I went and I went on the computer, made an email account, sent a response back, and once that response went off, the scammer sent me an email back. I was like, "Sweet, I'm engaging with a threat actor now." So through that, I kind of got to talking with the scammer, and eventually we got a bank account. We had gotten it to where they had clicked on a link that we had sent them and everything, just to track their IP address, and we thought we were awesome. And then that's kind of what started me into getting into this, and I just kind of started tracking the BEC stuff, and eventually became the BEC guy. So, and it's kind of a weird transition from fighting and hunting like APT malware and like tracking a bunch of different threat actors to going to fight one of the quote unquote simplest types of crime. But it is what it is, and again, that's kind of where the money is being lost right now.
All right, let's go ahead and we're gonna go with Jonathan. Jonathan, you have a question?
Yes. So I can attest that you're not wrong on the BEC, because that's the majority of something my team at work spends a lot of time dealing with, and some of the most successful things.
Yeah.
And on the technological side, because I keep getting asked for technological solutions to this when it's really a training, and about all I've been able to do is flag the word kindly.
Yep.
So have you seen anything better on that other than just user training and awareness? Because that's the common refrain on this, and it seems like like your slide, we're not getting anywhere with it.
Yeah. So putting my slight Agari hat on for a second and whatnot. One of the best ways to kind of look at it is start attacking the entire that vector of them sending the email. So put defense. I'm a big supporter of defense in depth and kind of looking at things from that perspective. So one of the ways that you can do it is start with DMARC, and that's a very easy, simple thing to implement. And what DMARC does is it makes it to where if someone sends an email that's impersonating you, or impersonating your company, it won't go through. There's different sets that you can set it to. You can have like a DMARC pass, DMARC fail. And what that would do is if somebody sends or DMARC notify, I think, that you'll have to double check me on that. But what that does is that will say if somebody sends an email on your behalf, on behalf of your domain, if it's set to notify, it will notify you but still deliver it. If it's set to reject, that email will actually not go to your other person who's seeing that. So it's something where having that good hygiene is something that will help with that. Your second piece is looking at reputation and kind of looking at different approaches and just kind of how they do those attacks. So looking at where accounts are logging in, looking at where accounts are being created from, new email forward rules, looking for spoofs of your CEO where they may be coming from like an actual Gmail account, but be your CEO's name. On the Agari side, that's one of the things that we do. And again, we can chat later if you're curious on that. It wasn't going to do a sales pitch here, so I'm going to keep it to that. But something where that's just some of the areas that we look at as well. And the other thing too, a lot of what security is coming down to these days, a lot of the breaches that happen, this is not just BEC, but all over in general, is doing the bare minimum. And it's something where following like basic security practices, two-factor authentication, making sure your domains are set up securely, making sure you don't have default passwords. That's what most of the breaches that happen these days are. So it's something where you need to start addressing that and start looking at that. And once you start being able to fix a lot of those little simple things, a lot of your other bigger problems go away. Why do you have an executable being able to be sent to your employees through email? Why do you have macros enabled? And it's like a lot of those small things are so small, but are actually facilitating a lot of fraud that we're seeing. So if you just disable those couple attributes, it will take that workload from like way up here and shrink it down for you.
All right, and that was Jonathan, right?
Yes.
All right, so I have, we probably have enough for like one more quick question. Nano Maste is up here with a question.
Hello.
Okay. Hey.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was wondering if there was some sort of repository with the scripts and pretext that the attackers use that we could either contribute to or use for user awareness training.
Yeah, so there's several places. So there are several forums that I would start with. Artists Against 419 does a lot of work on that. You have, I think it's scamwarners.com is another one. And there's several other like 419 groups who've been doing this for several years longer than I have. And a lot of the scripts do end up there. I don't know if they're tracked as a script per se, but they're templates that the scammer will send over to the victim. So that'd be your one of your first places to check. There's also a TLP white Slack called BEC International. Check that out, and that's that's a place where a lot of people can come and join. There's a media post on it. I can tweet it out just so it's up in the top, just so you have a copy of it. But yeah, that one's free to join, free for everybody to go in there. I think we just hit like 1,000 people in there. So there's a lot of people who's trying to help figure out this BEC mess. And again, it's when you have that many people who's fighting this and you still have this problem, it's like mathematically a lot of people doing it, a lot of fraud. That fraud must be big. So.
All right. Well, I want to everybody give it up for Ronnie here. Let's get some emojis in here. Send them some love.